sometimes when we're got our song leaders up here, and of course, you're supposed to follow your song leaders and watch them and pay attention. And I've been practicing with Jeremiah and Daniel both. I think they're coming along pretty fair, in my viewpoint. But I want y'all to look at Psalm number 12 in your song books. Because one of the things that I stress, 1 Corinthians 14 and 40, let all things be done decently and in order. And one thing, there's a reason we have a song leader. It's, I've been in lots of singing groups where everybody just sitting around a circle. Somebody hollers out a number and somebody just starts it, y'all take off, and that's just really cool. But in our worship assembly, all things should be done decently in order, which implies we need someone to lead. And so we need them to do so with some education, some background, some knowledge of the idea of song leading and doing it right. I want you to notice that very often, and Barry's done it, I know, and several others possibly, but you sing 3 or 4 of the verses and then you sing the chorus. I want you to look down at the refrain and what it says right after the refrain. That song, which we never sing that way hardly at all, was intended to be sung all the verses and then the chorus. Jeremiah, he's sharp, dude. I'm telling you, he's got it down. That's exactly the way it ought to be done. And I appreciate watching guys who really are trying hard and deserving of recognition and encouragement. I really appreciate Jeremiah and appreciate Daniel and the work they're doing and how they have matured and grown. And it's a wonderful thing, I think, in a congregation to watch people grow. And that's not to say some of the older folks here haven't grown some too. And I won't embarrass him, but I'll just say his initials. But Ronnie's got up here on a couple of occasions and led a song. Oh, did I say? I'm sorry, I meant the initials, RG. But anyway, it is an encouragement to me, and I just can't pass it up, to tell you how much I'm encouraged by the growth we have here in individuals and seeing them progress in our worship assembly, but also in the way they conduct themselves. And I appreciate it so much. It's very encouraging to me. Which I told Kelly earlier, man, I got 2 harsh sermons in a row. I don't know what I was thinking when I made this schedule up, but this morning's was the stoning of Stephen, and now I'm going to try to encourage you with people just forgot how to blush. They're so ignorant of God's word. They do things wrong and they don't even know any better. Now, how I'm going to twist that to be something encouraging, I don't know. In fact, probably won't. But nevertheless, my introduction is not going to be helpful, because how often is it the case that you would ever think that people would get to a point where God says, I'm done? I mean, we envision God as a God who is extremely patient. God is long-suffering, Peter tells us, not willing that any should perish. That same Lord, Jesus Christ, told us in Matthew, the biggest part of the road is going to be covered by folks that are perishing. So how does that go together? Because it's not due to a lack of patience on God's part. But that is not to say that at some point in time He says, okay, I'm done with it now. If nothing else, the flood teaches us that God can lose His patience with people that say, I'm done. And that was cataclysmic, and that was overwhelming, and it's often ironic, I think, that some of the most perverse people in our culture have used as their insignia the rainbow to represent them, and the rainbow is just that promise of God that I'm not going to destroy the earth by water. They missed a little phrase there, by water, because He is coming back to destroy this planet, and those who are perverse are going to be those who will be found among the lost, and it will be a tragic thing. So God can lose His patience. As a matter of fact, as a prelude to this, by the way, if you've heard things similar to the lesson I'm going to speak tonight, it's because I was some while back, and I did this on purpose, I preached Jeremiah 6. If you go back to Jeremiah 6, there's a whole text there that's almost duplicated. And part of the reason, I don't think God is, in fact, I know for a fact, let me put it that way, God's not redundant. He does not repeat something unless there's a reason for it. There is a certain time, a point in time in humanity where God says, I'm done waiting for you to do the right thing. I firmly believe part of the reason you and I are still breathing today is because of God's graciousness and His patience with us. Something is still in our lives where we have opportunity to serve, and on the same side, opportunity to fix ourselves and be better than what we have been. And that's why we're still breathing. But it does come a time when he says, okay, I'm done with it. After chapter 6 and saying basically what I'm going to talk about in chapter 8 of Jeremiah, notice the middle of chapter 7, where he tells Jeremiah, and this is just so in contrast to what most people think of when they think of a loving, merciful God who he'll just accept anything I do and he'll be okay because he loves me so much. Look what he tells Jeremiah directly. Therefore, he's drawn a conclusion based on the response he's getting from people when he's warning them and helping them and trying to get them to do the right thing. He said, therefore, do not pray for this people, nor lift up a cry or prayer for them, nor make intercession to me. Why? For I will not hear you. He's telling this to a prophet inspired by him. Don't pray for these people. Man, what kind of mess do you have to get into for this to occur amongst his people? Now, we look at our culture and we go, yeah, our culture's in the toilet. It's just terrible. It's horrible where our culture is. But you would think Christians, on the other hand, would be so much better. And as one preacher said years ago, I think there's more world in the church than there is church in the world. Unfortunately, that seems to be the case sometimes because we are the light of the world. We're supposed to be the representation of all things pure, what we should be, the standard by which others can look and say, that's where you need to reach. That's what you need to go for. And all too often, you can't tell the difference between Christians and the world. And it certainly was the case with Israel at this time. Those of you that are familiar, Jeremiah is often called the weeping prophet. And when you read the lamentation, after the desolation and destruction of Jerusalem, stands to reason he had good reason to weep. There was a sad scenario that he was looking at when he started giving a synopsis of who this people was. And so we look at chapter 8 and verse 4, and it's not a direct repeat, but there are many similarities with chapter 6. But he talks about the fact that there is a confidence, a cockiness in people because they are God's people. You know, Christians in this day and age, members of the Church of Christ, have been accused of being a little cocky about things. I'm not sure where they got that. I've never felt that way myself, but I can't speak for others. But I understand I'm saved by God's grace. There is not a thing I can do that merits or warrants my salvation. I ain't going to go up to the, St. Peter and knock on the door and say, you owe me, let me in, as the illustration goes. That ain't going to happen. I know me. I'm glad y'all don't know me as well as I know me, but I'll tell you what, God knows me. And there ain't nothing in the world that justifies my salvation with God's grace. Now, that does not mitigate the fact that if I don't do what he says, I'm going to be lost. No, I've got to do what he says. Nevertheless, I am saved by God's grace. That's how we're saved. But to that point, that doesn't mean because God's grace saves me, as some people teach today, I can do whatever I want to do. No, contrary to that, this whole diatribe here of Jeremiah is against that which you should not be doing. You should not be doing these things. And so he goes on, and he sums it up, I think, kind of in my viewpoint, in verse 5, when he talks about them and says, Jerusalem, they're a perpetual backsliding. I like those two terms there. When you look them up, it's kind of interesting. Not only is it ongoing, but it's the wrong way. It's like, how do you get right when the direction you're going is wrong, and when somebody pushes you about it and tries to correct you about it, you just go faster? That's just, nonsensical. But that's how he describes them. And so he goes through and talks about why that is the case. In the first place, they love things false. They hold fast to deceit. They refuse to return. And by the way, there is an implication when somebody refuses to return, it is implied they know where the returning point is. But they refuse. You know where you should go. I've heard that so many times. I heard it this afternoon when some fella got up with his plate, knowing full well he's trying to watch his sugars, and says, I'm going to go ahead and have all 5 desserts. Okay, I wasn't wise when I did that. But isn't it just something wrong with the fact that when you know where the return point is and you should go there, and you don't? That isn't right. Shouldn't be proud of it, certainly. Should be watching it. I do have a cheat day, by the way. Today is my cheat day. I hate calling it that because it sounds like it's illegal, it's wrong. But boy, there was some good dessert today. But, they refuse to return. They know where the point of return is, but they won't go there. And that's what gets you into a shape where God tells a prophet, don't pray for them anymore. They don't speak right. Now that's poor English, but they do not speak aright. I think it's a little bit phrased differently in the King James translation, but the whole point is they're not saying those things they should be saying. Now that works on two sides of things. That means the things they should be saying, and the things they should be saying, they should not be saying those. But the point is, they're not speaking right. Whatever they speak is just not right. And what they've done, and here's the real problem, they've turned to his own course. What really fascinates me is sometimes when God, through these prophets, gives us illustration of the degree or the amount of how this sin has been indulged in. And here's the comparison. And I don't know whether you've ever watched movies that have this in it, or whether you've ever been on a horse. But when a horse goes berserk, it is a scary thing. Long story short, I had a really nice colt one time, turned him over to a guy, and he was supposed to help me break him, and I didn't have time, and he did break him, he killed him, and he really felt bad about it, but not bad enough to replace him with a decent horse. He gave me a rescue. Well, I don't know whether y'all are familiar with rescues, but sometimes rescues are not right in their mind, and they have had a hard life. And when you get a hold of a horse that's powerful, it's hard to control the horse that's real powerful. And so I was out riding in the pasture up in St. Joe on this horse, and here is up St. Joe, they had ravines up there that dropped 10, 15, 20 feet just straight down. And I knew where they were, and I was trying to turn this horse, and the more I tried to turn the horse, I don't know, a little trigger went off in his warped brain where he had been beat too many times on that, and he just decided to run faster. And I'm sitting on this horse headed for this ravine, and I know what's going to happen. And I peeled off, but the horse stopped just before he got there. Now, I fixed that horse later, permanently. But the whole point, when you have a damaged horse like that and they just go crazy, they'll kill you. In this particular illustration, as the horse rushes into the battle, I don't know whether you've ever seen or read accounts of how this happens, but boy, they used to have cavalry back in the Greek days particularly, and then further on in the Roman days, and it was amazing what they would do with this cavalry, where they would rush into a battle, and of course the rider was very familiar with what was about to happen, and very often with these long spears they could lower them down and the horse would run right through them. And that's exactly the way he is defining people who turn to their own course. You don't even realize the danger you're going toward, and when it's there, it's too late. And that's how he describes it. Like a herd of horses. I always compare it to a bunch of lemmings running off the side of a cliff. But it's the same kind of notion. You're talking about going into something where you don't even realize how devastating this is. It's about that time that God says, don't even pray for them. They're not worthy. When a people gets to this point, I think too, it's very ironic that he would use animals again in the next illustration, where he talks about, I think the King James says turtle, I believe the term is turtle dove or something of that nature. The swift, the swallow, these kind of migrating birds, they know, because God made them that way. It's not something that evolved. God made them that way, and they know when they're supposed to go south, maybe, for the winter. Animals sometimes are just smarter than humans. And he says, but my people do not know the judgment of the Lord. Looking at our lives, and many of us here have got a gray hair or two, and so we have more years behind us than we have in front, that kind of thing. We have a better sense of our temporary nature in this existence. And there ought to be things that come to our mind and be taken seriously when we get to these kinds of points in our life. So I'm speaking to a good crowd now, mostly of folks who don't really have lots of guarantees about tomorrow. And the question would be, where are you? How are you submitting yourself to God? Because this was God's people. This is not the world, the common folk, the folk that are not saved, that have not claimed Christ as their Savior. No, we're talking about God's People, that's who Jeremiah's talking about. And they've totally lost themselves. They just don't even know the judgment of the Lord. There's going to be a lot of disappointment when Christ comes again in the clouds, of people who realize too late, everlastingly too late. Almost persuaded always comes to mind. Almost persuaded, almost but lost. I have struggles leading that as an invitation song. That's almost like an ultimatum to anybody in the crowd that has not become a Christian. If you leave here not becoming a Christian, you are almost, but you're lost. And these people here, they rejected the word of the Lord down in verse 9. And the question would be, if you reject the word of the Lord, where are we? Well, you don't have any wisdom, that is a fact. You're totally void of wisdom. But some of the things he describes here as the penalties for this, he takes into things that is so important, both socially and as a people of God. The two things he says, I'm going to give your wives to others. That's a slap, if there ever was one. Further, the fields you're going to inherit, you're not going to have them. You know, your lineage that you take such great pride in as God's people, that they were waiting for this Messiah and through whom he might come. And no, that's going to be all gone. And part of the reason, which looks like our culture, it may be impacting the church as well, everyone is given to covetousness. From the prophet even to the priest, everyone deals falsely. Charlie Brown used to tell me in Italian, my first place where I preached, he said, if you don't, and he had a store down there, he said, if you don't remember anything from me that I've told you, remember this. And I do. If a man will lie, he'll do anything. Well, that's Satan. He started with a lie, and he'll certainly do anything. And they heal the hurt of my daughter, the daughter of my people, slightly. We'll just placate you. We'll try to make you feel better about things. But when it comes down to it, when you do what's wrong, when you get to this point, you don't even realize you should be ashamed. Now, our culture's already there. We're seeing things, you can watch it in entertainment field, any device you have, any TV program, you can see the world has no problem with some of the most grotesque and ugly perversions for which God came into Canaan and totally destroyed it because that's what they were doing. We got that going on in America right now. Now, America is not nearly as bad as some places. But in the church, how is it that so much of the world gets into the church? A part of the problem is we don't know how to be ashamed. They did not know how to blush, he says in verse 12. In the time of their punishment, they shall be cast down. It's like an ultimatum that God is giving the children of Israel, to which they did not listen, by the way, if you read on through the prophecy of Jeremiah and into Lamentation. They just did not listen. And you got to ask the question, when they're being told by this prophet, this is going to happen, and what their response is, we don't like what you're saying, chuck him in the prison and take the roll that Baruch, his secretary, wrote and tear it up in little pieces and throw it in the furnace and burn it. We don't want to hear it. Well, that's what causes preachers to preach moving sermons. You preach a sermon and then you get fired because you're moving, because people don't want to hear the truth. I don't have a punchline that's real upbeat and encouraging for the sermon. What I do have is the ultimatum given in verse 20. Kind of a synopsis of how things are. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. What a horrible circumstance to find oneself in. Almost, but lost. Let it never be said of those of us who belong to the Lord here in this place, that our lifestyle, our mentality is so jaded and so overcome with what the world stands for that we can't even see that we ought to be so embarrassed for some of the things that go on. We ought to recognize where God is coming from and what we will be accountable for. And I don't say those things just strictly to scare you. However, Jude does recommend some you go gentle with, some you use fear. The reality of the judgment is something we need to take into account, and we need to be ready. And I encourage you, please be ready. We all want to go to heaven, don't get to a point where you don't even realize that's wrong, I shouldn't be going this way. Not only that, headlong into it, I need to back up, rethink and look at my life and say, you know what, I gotta rethink this stuff. I gotta do the right thing. And so we encourage you in the song that we're about to sing. Won't you stand?